All right. Welcome back to another episode of Comics Della Morte, episode 41, The World of Kaiju, with our special guest, Gazbot.
Me?
Yeah.
Hiya. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. I know Gaz from like the 100 Days of Making Comics, some of the group chats we're in. So, just talk to him a bit. And like, if anyone remembers me doing my animation kids book, I was actually going to plan to have him work with me to do some voiceover, but things fall through, but we still had connection. So, thank you again for coming on.
No, totally. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. And so pretty much you want to let the audience know some things about you besides what I put in the description?
Sure. I'm about 5'10". I usually am like 185, but with COVID, I'm close to 200. I'm not thrilled about that. I'm right-handed. I can ride a motorcycle, but I haven't ridden a motorcycle in about 20 years, so maybe I can't.
Gotcha.
Do you mean art-related things or
just art-related things?
I think you covered it well. I have a degree from School of Visual Arts. I used to work at Six Flags doing caricatures for years. I've been a professional artist of some sort for, like close to 20 years-ish, maybe a little more, a little less. I do illustration. I've done some comic work, nothing real big, but, things I've been paid for that were comics. I used to work in animation in New York. Now I live out in California. And I mostly nowadays I've scaled way back the last year or two, and I mostly do commissions, and I work on my own comic, The Horror A4, which we'll of course talk about. Most recently, I've been working for R.R. Park's cards. They're doing an Ultraman set, and I've been doing a bunch of sketch cards for that. And I should be taking less work, but I also just took a job doing a Godzilla shirt for Bay Area film events. And I might be working on a Gamera thing, so I'm not doing a good job not taking work. But anyway, that's what's up.
All right. So pretty much before we get into like Kaiju,
yes,
what makes you so, drawn to horror? In a sense.
Not speaking of Kaiju, but speaking about horror in general, I was a scaredy cat kid. I was, when other kids were watching horror, I was scared way longer than everyone else. And I think it's because I wasn't exposed to it. Like a lot of people had older brothers or uncles or something that'd be showing them stuff, and I grew up.
Yeah, pretty much 80s, here.
So, yeah. And a lot of my friends were like, they're like, oh, you haven't seen any Nightmare on Elm Street? I'd be like, no, I'm 8, like, they'd be like, oh, it's crazy, And so I didn't really see much of that. Every now and then my dad would show me something that he shouldn't, or whatever. But like, so I was really always scared about it. I would like hide behind the couch and all that stuff. And then it was Nightmare on Elm Street specifically was the turning point for me, because I had seen the first one and it terrified me. And then I didn't want to go to sleep, and it did exactly what it's supposed to do. And I was very scared of Freddy. And I saw a show called V, which was a sci-fi show. And Robert Englund, who plays Freddy Krueger, was in it as Willie, who was like this kind of dopey, friendly. All the visitors were evil, but he was the nice guy, kind of goofy, And somebody was like, oh yeah, that's the guy that plays Freddy Krueger. And I was like, what? And it demystified Freddy Krueger for me. And it was like, oh, I'm suddenly not as scared of. So I was like, well, I could watch some Freddy movies. And then it just snowballed from there. And I watched a lot of 80s horror stuff. I really was a fan of the Phantasm movies, and Evil Dead was another big one, because that was sort of half comedy, and Evil Dead was a huge one, because I didn't get really into horror until like high school. And like I said, a late bloomer. And I remember I had seen the first Evil Dead part of it, like the halfway through on like HBO or something in the middle of the night. Didn't even know what I was watching. And I'm like, this is crazy. And I'm kind of scared, but I kind of like it. And it was as I was discovering I liked horror. And it got to the end, and I coincidentally, this was before the internet, like a week or two later, there was some show about like movies coming out or behind the scenes or something like that. And they were showing a behind the scenes of Evil Dead 2 because Army of Darkness was coming out, which is Evil Dead 3. And I was like, there's a second Evil Dead. And the scenes I saw looked so much cooler with the chainsaw hand. I was like, oh my gosh, I should see that. But then I also saw that Army of Darkness came out. So I ran to the video store, rented Evil Dead 2, watched it, loved it, instantly became one of my favorite movies of all time. Like I'm sure it's true of a lot of people. And then a few months later, Army of Darkness came out, and I cut school to go see it because it was going to leave the theater in a week. So if I didn't go like that day, I wasn't going to see it. And so I could go on and on, but like that's, a combination of Nightmare on Elm Street and Evil Dead is what got me into horror at a later age than most people.
Awesome.
Plus, it's fun to draw.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So now going on to, well, let's say hello to the chats. You got
Yes,
Rue
hello to
Eats,
chats.
my brother, and then you got Kamikaze, our friend, and they're pretty much asking, what is your favorite kaiju?
I mean, Godzilla is the obvious answer. I mean, some people might not,
Mhm.
that might not be their favorite. I'm going to skip Godzilla. Well, I'll give you two answers. If I'm saying Godzilla,
Mhm.
I will say specifically the Heisei era 90s Godzilla. Biollante is probably my absolute favorite suit. So that's like my favorite
Mhm.
Godzilla. But forgetting about Godzilla, I really like Gigan, which was one of his villains that looks kind of like a punk rock chicken.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know who else. People really like Rodan. I liked Rodan in the Legendary movies a lot more than I ever
Mhm.
have previously. I've never been a huge Rodan fan, but in King of the Monsters, he had a very Starscream from Transformers, kind of like conniving. I like that version of Rodan, and he had the fire, which like I thought that was pretty cool. So in the Legendary movies, he's my favorite actually, is Rodan.
Mhm.
I'm looking around my room to see. I like a lot of Ultraman kaiju too, but a lot of
Oh,
the
you
big
can't
ones.
go
I'm
wrong
very
with Aquaman.
yeah, well, I'm looking over here because I have like a whole bunch of what they call spark dolls. So, like I like this guy a lot, the Bolton Sajian, which he's more of a space alien kaiju, but I mean he still gets big in his powers and his evil, so I consider that a kaiju.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I mean I could go on and just list a whole bunch more, but those are the ones that come to the top of my head.
Gotcha. Yeah, and pretty much with with Godzilla and stuff, people mostly look at that. It's like, oh, I want to see explosions, I want to see destruction. But then America started coming out with like horror movies that you could kind of put like in the kaiju area, like with the first Cloverleaf and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you appreciate America like approaching like that franchise?
I've only seen the first Cloverleaf, to be fair,
Hmm.
and at the time I was very disappointed because I think it just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I
Gotcha.
appreciate it more after the fact, but I thought it was
Hmm.
going to be like, yeah, like American Godzilla, like, well, this is our Godzilla, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it was much more, shaky cam Blair Witch kind of thing. But some of my favorite parts of that movie were the weird, like little monsters and like the weird scenes of people dying. They're like, well, what just happened there? Like,
Hmm.
so again, at the time I was disappointed, but then later I enjoyed it. I preferred actually, Super 8. Was it called Super 8? The
Oh,
Steven Spielberg? Not Steven Spielberg. It was J.J. Abrams.
with the kids.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that was a good
preferred
one.
that one. And of course, part of it is because of the nostalgia of the 80s vibe. But I
Hmm.
liked that one better. Although it was probably technically not as much of a kaiju movie like as Cloverleaf was. I mean, it had a big monster, but but just as far as like it hit me better and I enjoyed it more. Also probably because I didn't have the same expectations. Like I said, going to Cloverleaf, I was like, this is gonna be it.
Hmm.
What else? I mean, the 90s Godzilla, I hated. Just like, I think anyone who wasn't a kid when that came out did not like that movie. I could be wrong about that. And no, no hate on somebody who does like that movie. But I feel like the only people I know that really like that movie saw it as a kid. Anybody that
Yeah,
had
I
seen
didn't
other,
like the movie.
and yeah. So, well, how old were you when it came out?
Oh man, I'm gonna be 36 this year, so I don't know what year did it come out.
96, maybe. I don't know. I think
I don't know.
96.
I was one of those things like where I grew up around pretty much how you were saying you were a late bloomer, but with me and my family, we grew up as little kids, like watching horror movies and watching a lot of sci-fi movies. So I appreciate the old school Godzilla and stuff like that. And then
Yeah.
when they came out with this, I'm like, no, this isn't not my
Well,
Godzilla.
I think that's true of a lot of people. Like I said, the people who liked it, I think, were just young and hadn't really seen other movies of Godzilla. So, like, hey,
Hmm.
it's just a cool action movie. Because I haven't gone back and seen it recently, but I'm betting it's probably no better or worse than any other action movie from the 90s. It just doesn't feel like Godzilla. And interestingly, I found out way later, and you might know this already, but that they got the right, TriStar, was it? Whoever made it, got the rights to use the Godzilla name, but not
Hmm.
Godzilla's design. And obviously they would have changed it anyway. But like, so apparently behind the scenes, they had to make it very different, which is such a
Yeah.
weird deal to make. Like, I don't know. But yeah, other Godzilla movie, other kaiju movies that America. I mean, the legendary Godzillas. I thought the first one was okay, not great.
Hmm.
I really like King of the Monsters a lot. and I thought Godzilla versus Kong was fine, but the middle one was my favorite so far. I did like Kong Skull Island. I really liked, and I typically I'm not a huge fan of King Kong. I mean, I appreciate the technical achievement it was for its time and all that kind of stuff and its place in history, but I've just never been a King Kong fan. And Kong Skull Island definitely was my favorite King Kong movie and made me like him more than I've ever liked him before, which is good considering King Kong versus Godzilla was essentially a sequel to that.
Yeah, my nephew, who's going to be 18 this year and going to be a senior, you know, even him as a little kid, he didn't like that 90s Godzilla. He thought the cartoon version, when they came out with the cartoon series, was a lot better than the movie.
A lot of people said that.
Yeah, but he's like, you know, with Godzilla versus Kong, he liked that. But even with him, he's like, yeah, their standalone movies were a lot better than when they got together. Like, he really likes King Kong's movie by itself as well. Yeah.
I was again, and I was surprised because I was like, well, I'll go see it. The cartoon, I only caught a bit of it when it was on, and my main takeaway is that the art looked really nice. I think, and I might be wrong with this, I think it was the same animation studio that did the Men in Black cartoon, which was another cool cartoon. But I haven't seen it in so long that, you know, but I know a lot of people are like, oh, that, like, you could hate the movie all you want, but the cartoon was good.
Yeah, gotcha. And pretty much with me and you were writing horror and we're drawing horror comics. What approach did you come across? Like, okay, instead of doing supernatural or doing serial killers, you wanted to focus on kaiju for your horror comic. Why was that?
I've never been a huge, I'm going to say this and then I'll walk it back. I've never been a huge fan of supernatural stuff at heart. Now, that's not exactly true because there's tons of supernatural stuff I like. So the reason I'm walking back, in terms of, though, I never thought like, ooh, I'm going to make an evil wizard or I'm going to have a vampire. Like, I've never creatively been inspired to do anything like that. Now, I liked the show Supernatural. I like lots of movies that have supernatural things in them. So that's why I'm saying I walk it back. But like, it just never would even occur to me to do something like that. And then I don't know, like slasher stuff. My favorite slasher stuff is, this might be blasphemy, but I'm not a big Jason fan. Friday the 13th. I like, and I think it's because the first slasher movie that I saw was Freddy Krueger, and it had so much more going on. And I understand that it came later and whatever, but it's like he had this jokey personality and you know, all these other powers. And yes, it is supernatural. I realize the irony of what I'm saying. But the idea of just doing a straight slasher, just in a comic form, especially without having the music, you know, because like I also really like Halloween, and like famously, you know, Wes Craven, before he put the music in for the first Halloween, it was kind of like boring, and then he put the music in, and it's like, oh, now it's scary. So like it's very hard to do that, and it can be done, but I don't think I could do it, you know. It very easily could have been a werewolf book because I love werewolves, but. Yeah, I don't know. I think because at the time, honestly, I think it just had to do with the time. It was a couple of years ago. I hadn't done a comic that I owned since I was in high school or whatever, like in a million years. Since I became a professional artist, I had not done a comic for myself. And I had a few different ideas floating around, and I was talking to my wife and like, which one should I do? And she's like, well, which one is the most fully formed? Which one do you have an ending for? And the horror, I don't know if it was the best choice because I had a bunch of different ideas, but I had a beginning, a middle, and an end. And also at the time, I was just starting to do a lot of Godzilla art. Like I'd already liked Godzilla, but I was starting to get known. And I don't like to use that because I am not known. Nobody knows me. I'm not famous at all. But whatever little bit of notoriety I might have if I go to a con, if somebody happens to know who I am, now they might know me as a Power Rangers guy. But at the time, the only thing anyone knew me for was that I did some Godzilla art. So the fact that I had a beginning, middle, and end of a story with a giant kaiju, and people kind of knew me, if they knew me at all, as a Godzilla artist, I was like, well, this kind of makes the most sense, and that's the direction I went in.
Gotcha.
I'm not checking the chat very well, by the way. I hope you are.
It's all right. It's all right. Yeah. So my brother and him just joking around, but liking what's going on. But yeah, like you said with the werewolf comics, I mean, that's why you got Werewolf by Night with the Marvel comic. That was just a really big popular comic, and I liked the comic itself. And it would, like, I know Marvel went back to that stuff, but it would be nice for like Marvel to like reach back into that bag and focus more on comics like that and just the whole superhero thing. But that's why. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Oh, I'll say I agree, and my hope is, as Marvel's been putting out movies for 10 years, that they're starting to break away from the superhero formula, especially after Infinity War. Excuse me.
Yeah.
And they're trying different things, and we see, they're doing Shang-Chi and stuff. And I'm thinking that what makes sense to me is, okay, let's bring back Blade and Ghost Rider, like redo those, and get Moon Knight and all these. And I think they are doing a Moon Knight series, but like bring in the horror.
And a Blade movie, and a Blade movie is in the making.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. So that Werewolf by Night should be right there. And there's a lot of things you could bring in there and kind of do for the horror part of it what they've done for the superheroes and the cosmic part of it. Bring a few in individually and then build that up too.
Yeah.
I just realized when you were asking about what got me into horror, my answer was true but not complete, because talking about werewolves, before I ever really got into horror, there was a show on Fox when Fox was brand new called Werewolf. And as a kid, even though I was scared of everything, I watched a couple episodes of that. And it's like, for years it was unobtainable. I think now you can get it in Europe, but I still haven't seen it since I was a kid. But I loved it. They turned into these big, huge, hulking werewolves. And like, I don't know who did the puppetry. I don't know if it was Rick Baker or somebody famous, like, because I was a kid and I didn't know and whatever. But I loved that so much. And matter of fact, in the anthology, I did the story. We did Werewolves vs. Universe anthology. And I did a story. And part of it was, do you remember that show at all, Werewolf? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I heard of it. I never got a chance to really watch it.
If you didn't see it when it was live, you probably never saw it. Because like that's what I said, it's completely unavailable forever until just recently, and even now. But it was a thing where if you were a werewolf, you got a pentagram on your hand, like a bird, like a brand almost, and then it would like bleed, you try and change or whatever. And as a kid, and when I say kid, I mean like third grade. And again, I was scared of things. I didn't watch horror movies, but somehow because it was on TV, I was able to see it. And it was it reminded me of the Incredible Hulk show. You know what I mean? Where it's this drifter comes through town and then something bad happens and he turns into a werewolf and he does whatever. But I thought it was so cool. So I would draw there you go. So I would draw a pentagon on my hand. And teachers didn't love that too much because they thought it was some sort of weird Satanist thing. And I don't even think I understood the concept of Satanism or what the pentagon, like that. I wasn't like, this represents Satan. I was like, this means you're a werewolf. Like,
right.
Yeah. So that actually predated my actual dive into horror. That was the first seed.
Well, pretty much like you were saying, with unlike Jason, you have like Freddy Krueger and stuff like that. And even with vampires, my favorite vampire movie that hooked me on to like vampires was The Lost Boys. I mean, that was me as a kid. I watched that and I still watch that all the time around Halloween time.
That's a great movie. Yeah, that really holds. And
soundtrack is amazing too.
Yes, I used to have the soundtrack actually. People are strange when but yeah, if that falls into that like 80s category, like even when I wasn't into horror, when I was starting to get into it, that's the kind of stuff I would watch a lot because it was kind of half like an adventure movie, a little bit of comedy, and also horror. It wasn't just straight horror. So that I was always able to get more into that kind of movie. And I definitely watched The Lost Boys and like The Lost Boys.
Yeah. And like unlike Jason, I know with horror comics too, they made like a small run of Lost Boy horror comics, and I wish I could find them. I know they actually did like I can't remember how long of a run, but they actually did do Nightmare on Elm Street comics as well, if I'm not mistaken.
They definitely did. It was not Marvel. Well, there may have been a Marvel or DC, but I remember seeing them from like Dark Horse or some other one. I could picture like painted covers in my head. I don't remember who published them, but yeah. Yeah. They also did more recently. They did some Evil Dead or Army. I forget how it was branded because of all the licensing. It was either Army of Darkness or Evil Dead comics, where he crossed over with Marvel Zombies first of all, and also there was one where he crossed over with Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy. I remember reading it, but I don't at all remember what the story was now. I think it had to do with the Necronomicon, of course. Like somehow Freddy wanted it or something. Yeah.
Speaking, I don't know if you know about this, but there's this artist and a writer who actually took Freddy Krueger and Power Rangers and made a comic about it.
I have not seen it, but I am aware. Maybe you told me about it because I've definitely heard of it for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, and I remember seeing some images on Instagram or something, but I haven't. Have you read it? Is it good?
I like it. I like it. Yeah. It
seems so weird. Like it seems like it shouldn't work, but
it's like one of those things like Freddy just in that world, and it's cool because you have like the Power Rangers like campy stuff in there, but then you have like some things from like Freddy Krueger movies, like this person being attacked by this way. It's like, oh, that was from movie 2. This was from movie 4. Just
Right.
the person having a love for Power Rangers and Freddy Krueger, and just bring it together. It was just a great idea.
And I guess it seems crazy because it's like a rated R thing versus a kid show, but I guess Freddy does hunt teenagers, and they are teenagers, so it kind of makes sense that way too.
Right. Exactly. So do you want to share your website?
Oh, sure. My main website is just Gazbot.com, but then I have my that's not it. That's just a bunch of Godzilla comics. I didn't know you were going to share that. You watch me live. Type this in. Look at this. Gazbot.com. This is how I type. One finger at a time. This is my website.
Awesome.
And,
so you want to talk a little bit more, more about your horror comic?
Yeah. It's the Horror A4. I honestly, I don't know. I don't want to contradict you, but it's like, it is, you could call it a horror comic, but I feel like if I brand it a horror comic, people might be disappointed when they read it, because it's, like there's elements of danger and there's a monster and things like that, but it might not be what people think of when they think of a horror comic. So I just like put a little asterisk there.
Yeah, it's kind of like with a dark fantasy. It has horror elements to it, but it's more of like a fantasy realm.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how to pitch my own book is part of the problem.
Gotcha.
The horror, for those that don't know, this character right here that's with her back to us, that's Boots. She's like kind of the main protagonist. The Horror A4 is the name of the giant kaiju, which kind of has like a sort of an alien zombie look to it. And let me see, that's me in Japan. Okay. So if I go to comics here, you can see some of my Godzilla art, some of my Power Rangers art. But if I scroll down, this is like the first issue. So that's the monster. That's the Horror A4. And it doesn't have a real name. The military gave it a designation. It's an Alpha 4 level threat. So it's an Alpha 4 level threat. That's the whole designation. But the populants are like, this giant horrible monster. It's the horror. So it's the Horror A4 that's why the title of the book. That's why it's the name of the monster, even though, because it never really made sense to me that people would be like, well, this is the shambling mass, or this is the flaming eye. Like, that's military and governments are usually a little bit more pragmatic, and like, that's B-17 specimen. So it's Alpha level 4 threat, but then the people call it the Horror A4. So that's where that name kind of comes from. But yeah, I have 2 issues out. I'm working on the 3rd issue, which has been taking forever. Here's a more of a clear shot of the monster, which is, and you can see he's giant. So he's a dai kaiju as opposed to just a kaiju. Dai meaning large. It's my tiny bit of like preschool Japanese. I know. There's the 2nd issue. You could kind of barely see it, but that's him stalking in the background behind destroyed buildings. I'm working on issue 3. It's 5 issues total. It's taking me forever to do because it's a passion project, but I got 2 out, kickstarted at least, working on 3. And then there's another shot of Boots. She kind of has this crew, which starts off being kind of very important, but as the series goes on, these characters sort of fade into the background as she gets pulled out of the sort of ridiculous teenage life she has and more into like serious situations with the military and the monster and things like that. And I guess I should say, thank you. I guess I should say it's set in a sort of not our world. It's like 1 degree off, like a half a minute in the future, but not like, because I didn't want to set it in like New York or Japan or whatever. So it's just the place she lives is called Forward City Base 1, and I never mentioned the name of the planet. So it's like, make your own decisions about where you think it is. But I specifically didn't want it to be beholden to any specific time or place, and that's why I did it that way. Yeah,
I see. The 2 bottom ones on the very end. These those the last 2?
These 2. This is from a different comic. I could show you.
Okay, gotcha.
This is from a comic. This was a work for hire. My buddy Keith Gleason, who Reckless Sidekick Productions. He actually does a lot of stuff for Alterna Comics now. He does Mighty Mascots is the big one he does. But this was a book he did called Kid Switch, which was sort of I'll show you the cover. It's sort of a Ben 10-ish thing. And he wrote it, and I did all the art, pencil ink coloring, and then I think he lettered it too. But we only did 1 issue. And then somebody else was going to take over there for the 2nd issue, and I think it just kind of fell apart. So I got paid. I did the issue. It got published. It went out there, and I don't know. Hopefully, hey Keith, if you're watching, bring it back.
And so, with your horror comic, you got the front cover colored. Most people, they're like, okay, if you got to do a horror comic, you have to have it black and white. I mean, is that what you wanted to go with? Or you're like, well, it's just easier and I want to get my books out?
It is easier. It's cheaper. I mean, I'm charging $5 a pop and I'm not making much money on them at all. So if it was color, I would make even less money and or have to charge more. And I can't see charging more than $5 for a book when they're only about, 30 pages ish.
Yeah.
But I don't think horror has to be black and white at all. I think it can be. I love black and white. Just I have become a good colorist despite not having any interest in coloring, like just because I kept having to do it myself for clients, and because I had to do it so long I got decent at it, and then people hired me, and I wasn't going to say no to money when I needed it. So I've become a decent colorist, but black and white is my preferred way to work, whether it's traditional or digital. And if you want to compare it in comic terms, of course, there's The Walking Dead you could look at. So I have a little bit of that because I like the grayscale. But going further back, it's not exactly horror, but the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle stuff, like the Mirage and the First, that was all black and white, done with like duo-shade and zip-a-tone, and I always liked the look of that. And even though it wasn't horror, you see a bunch of ninjas fighting a bunch of Triceraton monsters or whatever they were doing that week, aliens, and like there was very sci-fi kind of whatever was going on. So I always liked the look of that. So the answer is, if I had all the time in the world and all the money in the world, it would still be a black and white comic.
Gotcha. Awesome. And pretty much, let's see, with your horror and everything, I know you go to a lot of cons, but besides comic cons, do you try to look for other cons that might actually pique more of an interest to the horror? Because I know down here you have, like, with Florida, you have Spooky Empire, which is like basically a horror con where you have like Robert Englund and all these different people from these horror movies coming together and getting autographs and stuff like that.
I if it's close to me, I'll try any con. Like if I don't have to travel or fly or anything, if I could drive there, I'm pretty wide open, and I've done lots of different types of cons. If I have to travel, I rarely will travel for like a superhero con. I've done a few. I did San Diego Comic-Con to try it out, and I like it as a con, but I did not do well selling there. Other people do worse. I made my money back, but that was it. Most of my sales weren't the comic. It was mostly prints I was selling, which is true at most cons to most creators, to be honest. You don't usually make your money on books. But at least at my level, maybe if you're a bigger name. But I have done a couple horror cons, not in a while. And I used to have a lot more, like all this stuff here, all the Power Rangers, all the Godzilla, like that's the main stuff that sells for me now. It used to be actually a lot more horror art. I used to have tons of zombie stuff. This was like right around the time Walking Dead was hitting big. And I was a big zombie. I mean, I still am a big zombie fan, but it was like, I loved zombies, zombie movies, zombie. And like I kind of got burned out on it right around the time everyone else was getting excited about it. But this whole thing was filled with like zombies and other stuff. And so I went to horror conventions a couple times for that, but they were kind of smallish. They didn't have any big, like the big names were like what's the guy, the original Jason, who was like, never wore the hockey mask. He was like the Jason who was like at the end of the first Jason movie. But yeah. Like he was like the big name. And then they had a couple of people. So, and nothing against him or anything, but like clearly I wasn't at like the top tier horror conventions. And then since I've had my book out, I don't know if I've been to a horror convention specifically since I've had it out. I have been to Godzilla conventions and Power Ranger conventions and things like that, where I would think it would do well. And it's a tough sell because I thought for a while, like, oh, if you like Godzilla, check out the horror, but it doesn't quite translate the same. So yeah, I'm open to it, I guess is the best way to say it, but I don't know. That's character garbage. But not recently. There is a big convention down south of me called Monster Palooza that I've been wanting to go to. But a combination of factors, every year, like it just didn't quite work out. And it's kind of hard to get into. Like you can't just be like, well, I think I'll go. You kind of have to decide way in advance and apply and everything. And just every year it was like that weekend, something else was going on, or I didn't have the money that year or something. But and of course now with COVID and stuff, like maybe next year I'll try again, or there's a chance I might be moving south soon. And if that happens, then it'll be a lot easier to do that one. But it's perfect because it's mainly a horror convention, but it also will often have Japanese guest stars from Godzilla or Ultraman or things like that. So it's like kind of perfect for me. It's like, oh, it's horror and tokusatsu. There we go. Let's do that,
Right.
And yeah, actually, I just remembered like 2 or 3 years ago, they had one up here. It was like Monsterpalooza Junior or Son of Monsterpalooza or some like off-brand, and it was up by me. I live in the Bay Area of California, and I got a table, and I was gonna do it, and then something happened and I can't remember. There was some minor scandal. I don't remember what it was. Something shut down, or something didn't open, or somebody didn't pay somebody, or whatever, and it got canceled, and I got my money refunded and everything. But that was gonna be my big. I'm gonna do a horror con near me, and then it didn't happen. So.
Gotcha. And pretty much you could break this up in 2 aspects. So first off, when you're writing the horror comic, how do you approach about that in general? Like, most people could be like this, but when you're really drawing and writing horror, of course, if you have a scene where someone is like getting their head cut off and stuff like that, how do you go about trying to make that look not so cheesy, but make it look realistic as possible? Because as horror artists, we have to kind of look at references. So do you look at movies or like to really get like that inspiration?
In this book, this is like a PG-13 book, so there's nothing too graphic in this book. But I have done more graphic stuff. Here's I don't think the book ever came out. There's a book, I forget the name of it, but it was basically like an alternate future. It wasn't a horror book, but it was very gory. It was an alternate future where Japan like won World War II somehow. And so like there was all kinds of samurais all over, and they had like guns and their samurai swords and stuff. And it didn't go anywhere, but I did a couple pages for it. Yeah, I mean, it seemed like a fun idea. And it was just like, I remember one page was just like, okay, the guy fires and then he cuts the other guy's head off and he slides and cuts the legs off. And so what I did when I approached that, and I guess what I would usually do is sort of first just do it completely out of my head. Like, what do I think would look cool? What's a good pose? And see if that kind of works. And if it kind of works, then I just start, finishing it up. And if it looks good, then I'm done. But that's not always the case. And then I will do what a lot of artists do, where I'll actually get in that pose. Like, does that make sense? What if my arm was chopped off? I'd kind of go like this, and then I will rarely look up reference, but it's tough because I don't really want to look at a lot of real people being mutilated and hurt.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to look at that too much. And then I will sometimes look at horror movies, but depending, like it's done way over the top in most horror movies, which I like, so depending on what the book is, if you want it to be a big, huge splatter effect, like what, then, but if you want it to be more realistic, then maybe you don't want to watch a horror movie. You want to look at like a murder mystery or suspense movie or something like that. Then you get the more realistic, and you get a lot of cool camera angles and stuff. Like, not that I've done this recently, but back in the day, like I would look at like a Hammer horror movie, or not even horror. I would look at like what's his Touch of Evil, or like Citizen Kane, movies like that, like kind of war movies, just because like really cool framing and really cool, lighting and angles and stuff, where that could convey the mood more than like a big, huge, bloody explosion, depending on what you're going for. But I don't know. Did that answer your question? I feel like I went off on a tangent there.
No, it's good. It's good because it's one of those things like unlike a superhero comic, unless you're wanting the comic to be graphic and violent, It's one of those things like horror. Most of the time, people, just like with horror movies, they don't go to watch the horror movies for the survivors. They go there to watch the villain because that's who they, care about. Just like people could like really sit in a circle, like, what's your favorite superhero? And kids fight about, who their favorite superhero is. And like, oh, this guy, I bet he could kick his ass and yada, yada. They do the same thing with horror villains, especially if it's like an 80s slasher,
Yeah.
And that's why it's like, oh, yeah, Michael Myers versus Leatherface, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah. But
I mean, Michael Myers would win that, right?
Right.
Leatherface is just a guy. Michael Myers is some kind of force of evil.
Right.
Well,
Exactly.
I guess depending on the mythology, he could just be a guy. I just like Michael Myers better, so that's why I think he'll win.
Mhm. Yeah. So, let's see. So when you make your horror comic, like, some people they work on the script first, while
Mhm.
others they'll like do like the Marvel way. They have an
Yeah,
idea and they'll just draw out the panels and add the dialogue afterwards.
right.
Like,
I think a lot of
how do
artists
you
do
really
that.
approach that? Yeah, I know I do that, especially with this horror comic.
Yeah, I think that is like the preferred way for artists to work. Typically,
Hmm.
that is not how I work. I I've had a lot of failed projects that I did half an issue or several pages, or I put it together, but then I didn't like it, or I didn't know how to end it, all the
Hmm.
way back to high school. And up until the Horror 4, with very few exceptions, I didn't have like a completed comic project that I actually got out there and continued to work on.
Yeah.
And I credit my being able to complete 2 issues and continue working on it with the fact that I did all the writing first.
Hmm.
I wrote full scripts for myself as though I was going to hand it to a penciler. And I started, like, again, in the beginning, I had this idea. Basically, I had the idea for the end first,
Hmm.
like, and I was like, that's how it'll end. And then how do I get there? And that ending actually kind of shifted. So the end that I had in mind is not the end of issue 5. It's kind of like
Hmm.
the end of issue 3, beginning of issue 4 is like what I originally thought the ending was. But then once I finished writing it, I was like, well, that's not the end. That's like a cool beat. But then there's more after that. So I
Hmm.
had that idea, and I just sort of had an outline, and I just kept slotting and like literally I had ideas for scenes. Like, what if this happened? And I would just write that. Or what if this character said this? And I would write that. And it was just like a jumble. I've heard people do this with like index cards and like kind of lay them out on the floor. I didn't do
Hmm.
that, but I did the equivalent of that with like notepads, just like lines, until I had like maybe 2 or 3 I keep doing this, 2 or 3 screens worth of just like literally, like, one would be like, hey, on a page have this kind of explosion happen, and then the next one would be like, after Boots goes in here, make sure she talks to that guy, and then it would literally be a snippet of dialogue of like, I heard somebody say that I thought would be cool in the book, and then it'd be like, make sure to whatever. And it would be unintelligible to anybody. It's not the kind of outline you could read and get it. Like, some of it would be a fully
Hmm.
fleshed out scene. Another would be like, write something about a fight here. And then I took that and fleshed out each thing so that it was legible to anybody that read it. And then I
Gotcha.
revised it and revised it. They say writing is rewriting. And I'm not a great writer. This is the most writing. This is the best writing I've ever done. Put it that way. And I'm not saying it's amazing. Just if you read this, you're reading the best thing I ever wrote, whatever that's worth. And writing is rewriting. And so I rewrote it a bunch of times until I had what I felt was a coherent story and decent characters, beginning, middle, and end. And I originally thought it would be about 40 pages. And if it was 40 pages, I would have been done a long time ago. As I worked on it, it got bigger and bigger, which anybody that writes has probably experienced this, until it ended up being closer to 100 pages. And then by the time, so then it was about 100 pages, and I let a few close friends and my wife read it, and they gave me notes, and I took their notes. I wasn't blindly just doing what they said, but like if they said something, I'm like, yeah, that is unclear, especially if things were unclear. That was the main thing. It's like, I don't understand this. I'm like, well, they need to understand this. And some people are like,
Yeah.
well, people are too dumb to understand it. It's like, no. Well, first of all, they're my friends and family, so I don't think they're dumb. But second of all, if people are too dumb to get it, you're still not doing your job, because I'm not writing so only the smartest people in the world can understand it. I want everyone to be able to understand it. I'm not trying to trick anybody here. So I didn't make a lot of huge changes. I made a lot of little changes, and then one really big change, which I won't say because it would give away something that happens in the end of the story. But like a pretty big thing towards the end, a friend of mine named Derek had suggested something, and I was like, yeah, you're right. And I wish I could say what it was, but it'll give everything away. So once I got the story where, I took all these notes and stuff, and it was like 100 pages or so, then I had to break it down into pages, like comic pages, as opposed to just text pages, and break it down into panels and stuff. And so I broke it down, and it came out to about 5 issues. And then each issue, I went down and made sure the panels would fit on each one. So now when I go to do issue 4, I have the chunk of the story that is issue 4 written, and all the dialogue's there, all the stage direction, all the characters, everything. And I have it broken down by panels. The only thing that then changes is when I go to do the thumbnail roughs of where the panels go, sometimes it doesn't work out, because I might say, oh, there's 5 panels, like it needs to be 6. And if that happens enough times, suddenly that 22 pages I thought it was going to be becomes 26. And that's happened every issue so far. So again, it was like 100 or so pages. I think now the whole story total is closer to 130. So we'll see how that goes. But I do have a full script that I might just need to massage when I do the thumbnails. Then I do. I've been talking for a long time. Should I keep going?
All right. No,
okay.
it's hey, because it's one of those things like with horror comics, like I've said on the show, when you really want to like have something like pop out at someone and like give them almost like a scare, most of the time you want that panel to take up most of the page.
Yes.
So, because if it's just so small, it's not going to have like that big of an impact.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, you don't want to have to squeeze something in. And the page turn is a big thing too. You don't want a reveal like here, like you want to be able to turn the page. Oh, there it is. Because if you're looking at the 2 pages and the setup is here, but the finale's like you could kind of see it subconsciously, see where it's going. So if at all possible, and I don't know that I would succeed in this, you want it to turn and there's the monster, like that's the better way to do it. Hello, sir.
Hey, Frank.
So once I have the script, I thumbnail the entire thing of the issue. So like beginning to end, and the thumbnails are super like stick figures. Like I'll draw on a little piece of paper, whatever, doesn't matter. Once I get all that done, and I just make sure that everything could fit, and that's where I'll adjust, say, oh, you know what, I need an extra panel, or I can combine these 2 panels or whatever, and that's where I adjust from the rating. Once I have the thumbnails, then I go in basically and start penciling. And the penciling could be super rough where like only I understand what it means, or it could be so tight that anybody else could ink it depending on my mood that day and whatever. And once I get to the end of that, then I go back to the beginning again and I start inking, and I ink it all the way through to the end, and I put the grays on. Once I get done with all of that, then the lettering happens, which either I do myself or I have a letterist that I work with. And then once all of that is done, then I do the cover. And the reasoning behind a lot of this is because like I said, I've had a hard time finishing things by giving myself this sort of factory process. Even if I'm not feeling it, even if I don't know what's going on, I'm tired. Like there's steps to follow. It's not like I never ever say, what should I do next? I always know what I have to do next. I might not want to, might not have time for it, but I know what I have to do. And also my theory is if I do all the pencils, by the time I get to the end of page 25 or whatever, I go back to the inks. I'm a better artist now because I just did 25 pages of pencils. Then I finish all the inks. Now I'm the better artist again. So now I pencil, ink, and color the cover. So the cover should be the best piece of art I'm capable of at that moment. And that's going to sell the book. And then start the next issue. And that's kind of like, that's my process right now. I don't know if it'll change when I'm done with this book, but that's what I'm going to stick to until like the 5th issue is completely done.
Gotcha. And since, you have you in the past, you said you had a passion for zombies. Is that why you instead of like any other type of design for your personal kaiju monster for your comic, you went with the zombie design because you like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I found that more interesting. And like and I like Godzilla and stuff, but there's so many monsters that look like a big lizard or an animal that has been gigantified in some way. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I like that stuff. But I was like, I want to do something different, and like how about a big? And I didn't want it to look literally like a zombie, it's not literally, but that the same way Godzilla doesn't look like a lizard, but he's based on a lizard. I wanted a monster that kind of looked like a zombie. Yeah, that's exactly why I did that.
And pretty much with your zombie kaiju being the star of the comic, how many hours did you really focus on him, unlike the human characters? Yeah.
I spent more time on that character than any other, of course. And I have lots of pictures of myself hunched over and walking weird, because that's a big part of it. The way the monster looks has evolved, but I had, even my early sketches were close-ish. I knew I wanted it to be kind of like bones sticking out and kind of looking rotting, and I wanted it to have like glowing eyes and mouth. I knew that like right from the beginning. Then it was a matter of what shape and where does things fall and like that kind of stuff. But the posture I always wanted to be like, I'm gonna stand up. I never wanted him to be like, like this, or like I always wanted kind of like a shambly, like, I intentionally made his arms a little bit longer than they should be if he was a human. So that even when he's standing upright, it looks like he's, and while there are moments when he's like attacking or like being active where he has to, look powerful, whenever he's not doing that, I try to have him look kind of like shambling and kind of like, just sort of, that was the thing I had to work on more even than what he looked like. But I did spend a lot of time on that. And even now, like when I have to do poses of him, a lot of times I'll just pull up the camera and take pictures of myself trying to do it.
So it's almost like a primal, like almost like a ape in a way, how they slug over in a
A little
sense.
bit. In this,
Yeah.
well, I mean, yeah, because like they do have the longer arms and stuff,
Hmm.
but I also want it to seem that he, isn't like the way a zombie, even though they could come and attack and be dangerous, they're not particularly bright and they're not particularly quick. Even if they move fast, they're not quick. You know what I mean? Like they're sort of like when there's no stimuli.
Because rigor mortis is setting in.
Right. Yeah. But I wanted him to be a creature that very much responds to stimuli. You know what I mean? Like in the first issue, he's asleep and they wake him up with mining. And if they didn't, he would have been happy to lay there forever. And then, they attack him and then he sees a power source. And so it's all, I didn't want it to be like, he's got this plan and he's, he's going to, it's just sort of like, what's, like just reacting to things like, like a primal, not in the sense like a primate, but primal in the sense of like more like a hurricane or something, just like it's just doing what it's doing.
Mm-hmm. And with more of kaiju, first they had like kaiju attacking villages and attacking cities, but then they started introducing robots like Ultraman fighting kaiju. Like, what, from your opinion, why do you like talking about that stuff? Because like you said, you got your Power Ranger show, you discuss that stuff, and you're doing the Ultraman cards. Like, what do you think that really draw people to just wanting to see a giant monster fight someone in a giant robot?
I mean, why do we want to see Freddy fight Jason? Why do we want to see Superman fight Thor? It's that thing of like, I can't answer it other than to say it's cool. You want to see the two things fight. And I think the idea of the monsters, the kaiju would just be against tanks and jets and things and humans. There's only so much they could do. And it was never personal. And as much as I was just saying about a force of nature, it was like Godzilla comes in and like, but you get someone like Ultraman grow to their size, or you get someone driving a mech. All of a sudden now it's a personal fight. It's a one, like, there's a bit of human spirit and determination. And even if they're not technically human, you know what I'm saying? Like there's a proxy for the viewer. And there's a little element of like the old WWE or WWF, of just like the wrestling match spectacle of like, why is Hulk Hogan fighting Mr. T fun to watch? Like, cause they're like these crazy people characters that don't seem like they exist in real life. And then they're like doing crazy. And to me, it's the same thing when you watch Godzilla fight Jet Jaguar or something, you know what I mean? It's just like, so spectacle and I don't know. It's just cool. It's just, we could analyze it to death, but it's just cool. Everybody knows it, like, and with Power Rangers. Sorry. I also love, I like the monsters, but I love the designs of the Power Rangers. And I don't just mean Mighty Morphin. Like I got a Dino Thunder here. I love the way every year they invent a whole new team with new helmets, new gadgets, and it's all themed. You know what I mean? Like, and some years are more successful than others, but just from a design standpoint, I find it fascinating and really cool.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would definitely say, like, besides Mighty Morphin that I grew up watching, I was really big on Mystic Rangers because they introduced like the magic and everything. And I was so like, funny. That was different because everything was like, oh, we got to have cars, we got to have space. But it's like you introduce like the Mystic Rangers and all this like magical stuff. So
that's funny because as I've been doing the show, I've been trying to catch up because there's like 30 years of Power Rangers, which I had not watched.
Oh, yeah.
As of now, having like made a point of trying to catch up, I have seen every single episode of every single season except for 2. And one of them is Mystic Force. I've not seen a single episode of Mystic Force. Not because I don't like it or anything. I just haven't gotten to it yet.
Yeah.
But having not seen it, I will still agree with you that there are a lot of seasons that are very samey. It's very like, oh, we got our costumes, we got our thing. But then there are ones that break out and do something different and break the mold. And a lot of times those are the best ones. One of my favorite seasons, one of a lot of people's favorites, it's called SPD.
Oh, yes.
You've seen SPD. Yeah. And they're like future cops. So it's very, very different. And so I can imagine Mystic Force having a similar vibe where it just breaking that sort of convention of what everything normally is just is always going to be more fun.
So pretty much, sometimes we like to talk, ask people with horror in general.
Yeah.
When it comes to the movies, of course, I've seen it and Jason's now finally seen it. Why do you think people love John Carpenter's things so much?
It's one of the best movies ever made.
Right.
I mean, I'm not even gonna say horror movies. It's one of the best movies ever made.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a study in human nature. It's a study on stress on people. It's got great acting. It's got great cinematography. It's shot well. It's atmospheric. It's plays on primal human, even without the thing, just a bunch of people stuck in a fortress on the top of the world right there. It's like, you could almost watch that movie without the thing showing up and it'd be interesting, you know?
Yeah.
And then the thing shows up and they don't know who it is. And it's like, it's sort of like, you know, the Red Scare of like, oh, your neighbor's your enemy. And, you know, and then on top of that, some of the best practical effects that have ever been done. Like,
exactly.
It's, I mean, I don't know what more I could say. Like, that hasn't been said by smarter people than me. It's just a fantastic movie. Funny story, actually. This is what I could say. That Drew Struzan, famous poster artist, did that poster of the, you know, the kind of the flash effect, whatever. A couple of years ago, I lucked into that. I couldn't even explain the story where it would make sense. I lucked into this thing where I was in a room with Drew Struzan and like 19 other artists, and I was one of them. I don't know why or how. I did not deserve to be there, but I was. And he was just talking to us and just shooting the, you know, whatever, and giving behind the scenes on a lot of stuff. And he gave the behind the scenes on that poster, and I forget the exact timeline, but it was something like he had 2 days to do it. Like they contacted him last minute. Hey, our other guy flaked or whatever. Like, can you do it? And he didn't even really see the movie. They're like, it's a monster movie. It's in the ice. It gets in people. They kind of like told him what it was about, but he didn't see it. And so he's like, he came up with that image, just like, okay, well, there's ice and I can't show a face because I don't even know the actors and likeness and all that. And like, and I only have a day. And so he had the thing coming out so you couldn't see, because like, that's the monster inside, I guess. And, and I think it's a great poster, but it's just crazy that he came up with it. Like, kind of, here we go. But it was so rushed that he was saying when he was like rolling, because he had to mail it, you know, back then he couldn't do like a high res scan. And he's like, the paint was still kind of wet. And he's like, when you open it, be careful because it's still a little wet. And like, so that's maybe something that the average person doesn't know about the thing. It doesn't explain what people like the movie, but that's a trivia I have.
Yeah. Like you were saying with like the movie in general, all these people and everything, movies like John Carpenter's The Thing, it's one of those things, if you're not a comic book artist, but you're just wanting to be like a writer for like scripts, movies like that give people so inspiration. And like people like me and you who are in the comic, you know, you're getting paid to do it. I'm trying to like get my stuff out there and, you know, just want to show people that, hey, I got this story and I want to get it out. But just watching that movie now from an artist perspective, you just enjoy it more than just being an audience member, just for like the writing, the effects and everything. It's like, oh wow, how like that thing came out of the guy's chest and then the head became like a spider. Just really great design. It's like, man, just that would be a great shot to see in a comic or anything, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So
I get that sometimes too when I watch, not that I'm comparing this to The Thing, because it's not, but when I watch old Ultraman or old Godzilla or old and any of those old Japanese tokusatsu sci-fi things, I like watching the old ones, as you said, like as an artist, because you could kind of see how they put it together, and you could be like, oh, they're kind of inventing special effects, and sometimes you still can't. And like, how did they do that? They didn't have computers, like, and so there's a charm to it and an appeal to just look back on things that are made with hands and just appreciate that.
Well, do you have anything else to talk to? We're getting ready to come up to like 55 minutes.
Oh yeah.
We go usually about 45 to an hour.
Oh my gosh, I better shut up, huh? No, not really. I mean, you can check out my Etsy store. I have prints of, stuff up there. I have copies of my book up there. I'm on Instagram, all the normal social media as Gazbot. I have my YouTube channel, which is half art and half Power Rangers reviews. Yes. That's my Etsy store. Yes. Thank you. I don't know. I'm not really promoting anything. All the stuff other than my Etsy store, everything I'm working on either isn't out yet, or I can't talk about, or isn't for sale, or, like I'm busy, but not with stuff I need to promote. And I don't think I have any. Okay. Well, I'll promote this. If you're in the Bay Area at all, in August, I'm going to be doing Godzilla Fest at the Balboa Theater. I forget the exact date. It's in August. There's 2 weekends back to back. King Kong investigates, King Kong infiltrates Godzilla Fest, and then Godzilla Fest. So I'm going to be doing both of those and selling my art and watching Godzilla movies and all that kind of stuff. But other than that, I have nothing really coming up to promote. I would say if you like American Werewolf in London, which you should.
Oh yes.
They NECA is finally putting out a werewolf figure of that, as well as the weird Nazi once for his vision. So get those so that they will then make more. I will say that.
Right. But yeah, I appreciate you coming on again. This was fun.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, Jason was busy and it was just me and you, but yeah, I sat down and we pretty much carried on for quite a bit. So it was fun.
Yeah, we can both talk, can't we?
Yeah, right. But yeah, I mean, if you ever have free time and we have episodes like this and you wouldn't just come on, because, you know, it's one of those things, not just doing like reviews on horror comics, but you could just talk topics about, like, you know, why people are fascinated with vampires and werewolves. And, you know, we could carry on quite a bit with like all these different things. So if you ever have free time and you want to come on and just shoot the breeze and talk about horror in general, just let us know.
Sure. Sounds cool, man.
All right. Well, thank you for everyone coming by. Frank, my brother, Ralph, we appreciate it. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.